Today we are going to explore one of the most fascinating chapters in military history: the engineering behind medieval castles, fortresses that resisted entire armies for years on end. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this. In the heart of medieval Europe, a question echoed in the minds of the most ambitious builders of their time: where to erect a fortress capable of resisting time and enemies? The answer to this apparently simple question would determine the fate of entire kingdoms. Medieval castles were not mere monumental residences, they were war machines conceived to overcome the most adverse odds. Their power did not reside only in the solidity of their stones, but in the intelligence with which each element was calculated. Let us imagine for a moment the landscape of Scotland in the 11th century. Upon a rocky formation that rises dramatically above the city of Edinburgh, the first builders evaluated the terrain with trained eyes. What they saw was not simply a steep hill. They saw a natural fortress sculpted by time itself. The volcanic rock upon which Edinburgh Castle would be built had formed approximately 340 million years ago, when the magma of an extinct volcano solidified into an extraordinarily resistant substance. The glacial eras that followed sculpted the terrain, leaving steep cliffs on three sides and creating a geological formation known as crag and tail. From a military point of view, it was perfect. The attackers who approached Edinburgh faced a brutal climb even before sighting the walls. The only accessible route followed the eastern slope, where the incline was gentler but even so exhausting for soldiers carrying heavy equipment. Historical records indicate that the castle was besieged at least 23 times throughout its history, making it the most besieged fortress in all of Great Britain. Each attempt at conquest began with the same ordeal: the steep climb that left men exhausted before the battle itself had begun. The choice of elevated terrain was a fundamental principle in medieval military architecture. Hills, cliffs, and rocky outcrops forced attackers to fight not only the defenders, but gravity itself. The physical effort of climbing a steep slope wearing full armor, which could weigh more than 20 kilograms, was debilitating. And while the soldiers fought against the terrain, the defenders at the top maintained total advantage in visibility and range. But not all medieval builders had volcanic mountains at their disposal. In flatter terrains, other natural elements were exploited with equal ingenuity. Water offered instant protection in multiple directions. Castles built on peninsulas or islands created natural barriers that siege equipment could not cross. Bodiam Castle, erected in East Sussex in England in 1385, exemplifies this strategy with almost theatrical perfection. Sir Edward Dalingrige, a knight who had fought in the 100 Years' War, chose a site near the River Rother and surrounded by marshes that made the approach of any hostile force difficult. The construction of Bodiam took approximately 7 years and resulted in one of the most iconic images of medieval architecture. The quadrangular castle, with circular towers at each corner, seems to float over its moat, fed by natural springs. The water created a complete barrier that prevented any attempt at underground mining, a common siege technique in which sappers dug tunnels under the walls to cause their collapse. Any excavation would be immediately flooded. Access to the castle was deliberately tortuous. Anyone wishing to enter needed to cross a long wooden bridge that meandered through the moat instead of crossing it directly. This winding route exposed attackers to the fire of archers positioned in the towers during the entire approach. Even if they managed to reach the barbican, the fortified structure that guarded the main entrance, they would still face the imposing entrance gate with its deadly traps. Historians debate the true function of Bodiam. Some argue that its defenses were partially scenographic. The moat was shallow in some sections, and the upper windows were too large for arrow slits. These characteristics suggest that Bodiam was conceived not only as a fortress, but as a statement of status by its owner. Regardless of Sir Edward's aesthetic intentions, the castle was never conquered by force during the medieval period. During the War of the Roses, its Lancastrian owner surrendered to Yorkist forces, but there was no battle. The true destruction of Bodiam came centuries later, during the English Civil War, when the interior was deliberately dismantled by parliamentary forces to prevent any future use by the royalists. The approach routes to medieval castles were carefully manipulated by the builders. paths were designed to be narrow, winding, and completely exposed. This forced attacking armies to march in thin and vulnerable files, unable to form the compact masses that would normally give a numerical advantage. Some castles possessed only a single access route, while others rose over precipices that eliminated entire angles of attack. The climate also served as an ally to the defenders. Winter winds whipped exposed besieging forces, while spring rains turned paths into quagmires. Siege equipment became mired, becoming useless. The natural terrain also functioned as a psychological weapon. Let us imagine the perspective of a soldier who marches for days only to arrive before a fortress perched upon an apparently inaccessible cliff or surrounded by treacherous marshes. Historical records indicate that some sieges were abandoned simply because the attacking army could not figure out how to overcome the natural obstacles. The sight of the insurmountable fortress undermined morale even before the first arrow was fired. Forests around the castles were strategically preserved, restricting siege equipment and providing cover for counterattacks. Builders also shaped the landscape, creating artificial lakes and clearing specific areas. Nature was transformed into a component of the defensive system. Once the attackers overcame the natural defenses and reached the structure itself, they faced the next challenge. Medieval walls were not simply large, they were marvels of engineering conceived to absorb practically any punishment. The size of these constructions would impress most modern visitors. Many castle walls were 6 meters thick, some reaching nearly 7 meters. Dover Castle, erected over the iconic white cliffs of the English coast, possesses walls that reach this impressive dimension. The construction of these walls followed an ingenious technique known as a sandwich structure. Workers erected 2 parallel faces of hewn stone and filled the space between them with smaller stones, rubble, and mortar. This rubble core created walls that were immensely strong and at the same time relatively flexible, capable of absorbing impacts without cracking. The combination of external rigidity and internal cushioning made the walls extraordinarily resistant to battering rams and other assault equipment. Many walls featured an inclined base called a talus or batter. This feature deflected attacks upward instead of absorbing them directly, reducing the effectiveness of battering rams. The angle also created problems for assault ladders, which became unstable when leaned against the inclined surface. Medieval architects had discovered that a slope was not only a logical fallacy, but an excellent defense strategy. The most sophisticated castles featured concentric walls, a multi-layered defense system. An outer wall protected the perimeter, while a higher inner wall rose behind it. If attackers managed to breach the first barrier, they would find themselves trapped in a death zone between the 2 walls, with defenders firing from both sides. This configuration transformed every meter of advance into a deadly ordeal. Some builders incorporated small pebbles into specific sections of the walls, particularly where enemy sappers might try to dig tunnels. These loose materials shifted and made noise when disturbed, alerting guards to excavation activities. It was a medieval alarm system that did not require batteries, only physics and gravel. Dover Castle deserves special attention. Its strategic position over the Strait of Dover, the narrowest point of the English Channel, made it the key to England for centuries. The original fortress was established by William the Conqueror after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. In the following decades, especially during the reign of Henry II in the 12th century, the castle was massively expanded and reinforced with the most advanced techniques of the time. During the siege of 1216, French forces led by Prince Louis tried to take Dover in support of the English barons rebelling against King John. The siege lasted 10 months. The attackers employed battering rams, catapults, and tried to undermine the walls. The defenders, led by the formidable Hubert de Burgh, resisted stubbornly. The battle reached hand-to-hand combat in the underground tunnels, with knights in chainmail brandishing swords and axes in the dark and narrow passages. Dover did not fall. After the siege, Henry III ordered extensive improvements to the defenses. 3 new fortified gates were built, along with a defensive extension known as the Spur. The medieval tunnels excavated during and after the siege remained in the depths of the castle, silent witnesses to those brutal months. Centuries later, during the Second World War, these same tunnels would be expanded and used as headquarters for Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk. If the walls were the first physical barrier, the gate simultaneously represented the weakest point and, paradoxically, the strongest of the defenses. Medieval engineers transformed what could have been a vulnerability into one of the most ingenious traps in military history. The gate was not a door, it was a mousetrap where the mice wore armor. A typical gate consisted of multiple barriers. First came the drawbridge over the moat. Behind it, heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron, but the real danger waited just beyond. The most crucial defensive element was the portcullis, a heavy wooden or iron grate that could be lowered from above. Many advanced gates featured two portcullises, spaced approximately 6 meters apart. Medieval architects had invented the first crumple zones in history, long before car manufacturers thought of anything similar. Except, these were designed to crush people, not to absorb impact. The ceiling between the portcullises contained openings known as murder holes. Through them, defenders could pour stones, boiling water, or burning pitch over trapped attackers. Some of these openings in important castles measured more than 30 centimeters wide, allowing for particularly unpleasant surprises. Arrow slits lined the walls, allowing archers to fire from protected positions. These narrow slits gave defenders a wide field of fire while presenting the smallest possible target to enemies. The entire gatehouse usually projected beyond the main walls, creating a three-dimensional death zone. This configuration allowed defenders to pour destruction from above and from both sides simultaneously. The Gatehouse of Beaumaris Castle in Wales exemplifies this deadly engineering. The structure extends significantly beyond the main walls, creating a lethal corridor. Few attackers survived the passage. Some architects added perverse psychological elements, such as sharp turns that disoriented invaders and prevented battering rams from gaining momentum. The medieval concept of "you can't get there from here" was literally built into the architecture. The most cunning trick was the false gate, a convincing-looking entrance designed to lure attackers into an area even more heavily defended. It was the medieval version of the bait and switch, when that attractive entrance reveals itself to be a deadly snare. Height offered a crucial advantage in warfare, and medieval builders utilized this principle with devastating effect. The tops of the walls and towers were sophisticated weapon platforms designed to pour death upon attackers. The most recognizable feature of castle walls, the battlements, were not merely decorative. The raised sections, called merlons, protected the defenders, while the spaces between them, the crenelles, allowed for firing arrows or throwing projectiles. Behind the battlements ran the wallwalk, a walkway where defenders could move quickly around the perimeter. These paths were wide enough for 2 men in armor to pass without anyone accidentally falling. Firing from above gave defenders a significant advantage. Archers with longbows could hit targets 200 meters away, while crossbowmen dealt with closer targets using projectiles capable of piercing armor. Some towers featured arrow slits arranged to create overlapping fields of fire, where attackers would face arrows coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Heavier weapons included ballistae, devices similar to giant crossbows that fired bolts powerful enough to go through several attackers with a single projectile. Simple physics provided the most terrible weapons. Heavy stones dropped from heights between 10 and 20 meters crushed shields, helmets, and the people wearing them. A stone of approximately 9 kilograms falling from 12 meters hit with force comparable to the kick of a horse. Defenders heated sand or water. Contrary to popular belief, oil was too expensive for regular use. This scalding substance was poured through machicolations, stone projections with openings in the floor. Hot sand penetrated under armor, causing excruciating burns, while boiling water could scald attackers to death. While these elevated defenses made direct assaults almost suicidal, determined attackers frequently tried to bypass the walls completely. This led castle designers to develop one more critical defense. Approaching a medieval castle was not as simple as walking to the front door. Between the attackers and those stone walls, there was usually a massive ditch, the moat, creating a serious problem for invading armies. Most moats measured between 3 and 10 meters wide and between 1.5 and 3 meters deep. Although water-filled moats were common, their function went beyond drowning enemies. They prevented the digging of tunnels under the walls, as the water table would flood any mining attempt. They also forced attackers to build bridges or use boats, both dangerous options when arrows rained from above. Dry moats worked equally well. These deep ditches could contain sharpened stakes, metal spikes, or in warmer regions, even dangerous animals. Some builders took psychological warfare to new heights by filling moats with sewage and decaying waste. The odor alone could make attackers reconsider their plans. Crossing these barriers required portable bridges or massive earth-filling operations, where soldiers dumped soil and wood into sections of the moat, all while being targeted from above. Drawbridges added another ingenious layer of defense. Operated by counterweight systems or chains hidden inside the gatehouse, they could be raised quickly to create an impassable gap. Some advanced castles featured multiple drawbridges in sequence, creating several obstacles to overcome. Curiously, archaeological investigations at Bodiam Castle revealed that its impressive moat was quite shallow in many sections. This suggests it was designed partially to impress. Medieval lords understood that sometimes looking formidable was half the battle. While moats excelled at slowing ground attacks and complemented the wall defenses discussed earlier, any invader who managed to cross these aquatic traps would next face an even greater challenge. Medieval towers were not just impressive stone structures, they were sophisticated battle stations that controlled the entire defensive system. Rising up to 30 meters high, towers gave defenders the maximum advantage of elevation and visibility. First, towers served as early warning systems. Sentinels positioned at the top could sight approaching armies days before their arrival, using smoke signals, fire beacons, or flag systems to alert the garrison. The Tower of Constance in France possessed a special chamber for signal fires visible for miles. Those medieval watchmen were like human traffic cameras, except instead of speeding tickets, they distributed arrows. The design of towers evolved significantly over time. Early square towers had a serious flaw, blind spots at the corners where attackers could work without being seen. In the 12th century, round or D-shaped towers became standard, eliminating blind spots and making it almost impossible for battering rams to find flat surfaces to strike. These curved walls also deflected projectiles better than flat surfaces. Strategic positioning was crucial. Towers were typically spaced between 30 and 60 meters apart, the effective range of a longbow, ensuring overlapping fields of fire where attackers would face arrows coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Trying to dodge arrows coming from various directions while climbing a ladder was the medieval version of an unfair video game. Internally, designers created specialized combat platforms with arrow slits, narrow gaps that allowed archers to fire while remaining protected. These openings were ingeniously widened inward, giving shooters wide visibility while presenting minimal targets to enemies on the outside. Towers connected to the wallwalks, allowing defenders to move quickly between positions. Many towers featured spiral staircases winding in a clockwise direction, a small but brilliant detail that gave defenders coming down an advantage while hindering right-handed attackers coming up. With these tower advantages secured, defenders still needed one more crucial element to resist long sieges. Once the gates were closed and the drawbridges raised, a medieval castle transformed from a fortress into a self-sufficient community. The real challenge was not just keeping enemies out, it was keeping everyone inside alive. The original lockdown had nothing to do with pandemics and everything to do with not being murdered. Food storage formed the backbone of survival during sieges. Designers built enormous underground depots called cellars, specifically to hold enough provisions for months of isolation. These cool, dry spaces preserved grains, beans, and dried fruits, staples that could last during long sieges. Barrels of salted fish, smoked meats, and cured cheeses lined the walls. Most castles maintained food stocks for at least 3 to 6 months, with some prepared for an entire year of isolation. Dover Castle in England had storage capacity for a garrison of 100 men to survive for nearly a year. Medieval meal prep was not about photographs for social networks. It was about not starving to death while arrows flew over heads. The water supply proved even more critical than food. No matter how thick the walls were, thirst would defeat anyone in days without access to potable water. Builders solved this problem by digging deep wells directly into the rock under the central courtyard or main tower. Some of these wells reached impressive depths. The well at Crac de Chevalier, the formidable Crusader fortress in Syria, plunged approximately 36 meters down. Other castles collected rainwater in enormous cisterns that could hold thousands of liters. The smartest designers built their wells before erecting anything else, ensuring that workers had water during the construction process that lasted years. Nothing ruined the day like spending 5 years building impenetrable walls and then realizing that no one had thought of drinking water. Daily life during a siege was uncomfortable. The population swelled as peasants sought protection. Great halls transformed into communal dormitories and privacy disappeared. Sanitation presented another significant challenge. Designers built latrines that emptied through chutes in the outer walls, a simple but effective system in normal times. During sieges, however, these openings became vulnerable points that enemies could climb or use to start fires. Alternative arrangements included urinals emptied into dedicated waste pits in the courtyard. Some larger castles featured sophisticated systems. Pembroke Castle, in Wales, had a massive latrine tower that could accommodate 20 people simultaneously. Medieval architects understood, no matter how elegant the castle, everyone had needs. Health concerns increased as sieges prolonged. Fresh vegetables ran out, raising the risk of scurvy. Inhabitants relied on the brewing of beer and wine, not just for morale, but because fermentation made these drinks safer than potentially contaminated water. The psychological impact of life under siege was immense. Boredom, fear, and claustrophobia affected everyone. Life continued with structure and routine. Guards maintained watch. Games like chess and backgammon helped pass the hours of waiting. While the imposing defenses discussed earlier kept attackers at a distance, sometimes the castle inhabitants needed ways to get in and out without being detected. The most important doors in medieval castles were often the ones no one could see. Behind the massive walls and towers lurked networks of hidden passages, disguised doors, and secret tunnels that served both as emergency exits and strategic advantages. The original emergency exits did not have those annoying alarms, but occasionally they had snakes. Secret escape tunnels, known as posterns or sally ports, allowed defenders to slip away unnoticed during sieges. These narrow passages typically emerged far from the main castle, in forested areas or ravines. Dover Castle features a famous example, a tunnel of approximately 60 meters through the solid chalk cliffs that was not rediscovered until 1794. These were not just emergency exits. They were the medieval versions of discreetly leaving an unwanted party. These hidden routes made defensive sorties possible. Small groups could slip out at night to sabotage enemy siege equipment or attack sentinels. Records of the siege of Dover Castle in 1216 describe defenders using sally ports for night attacks that destroyed enemy catapults. Most of these exits had multiple sharp turns to prevent enemies from invading should they discover the passage. Some tunnels served more practical purposes, connecting buildings during peacetime and allowing rapid movement of reinforcements during sieges. False passages represented a darker aspect of these systems, traps deliberately designed for infiltrators. Some led to dead ends where enemies would be cornered. Others contained hidden pits with spikes at the bottom. Cawdor Castle in Scotland featured a false escape tunnel that led to a flooded chamber where intruders would drown. The secrecy of these passages created vulnerability as much as strength. Several castles fell because of treachery involving hidden entrances. In 1330, Nottingham Castle was penetrated through a forgotten tunnel coming from a nearby tavern. At Château Gaillard, attackers discovered an unguarded latrine chute that allowed them to infiltrate the fortress. The castle designer, who forgot to place guards near the bathroom, probably had a very bad performance review. While secret passages provided crucial advantages during attacks, the final defense remained in the castle's ability to resist and counterattack the specialized siege equipment that attackers brought against its walls. Medieval siege machines were impressive, but castle defenders did not simply sit around waiting to be crushed. They developed countermeasures that transformed attacking a castle into a deadly game of medieval chess. When attackers rolled up with battering rams, giant logs with metal tips, defenders poured massive stones directly onto them from the battlements. These were not pebbles. They were boulders weighing hundreds of kilograms that could shatter wood and crush unfortunate soldiers below. The medieval equivalent of dropping a piano on someone's head, except no one got a funny tune at the end. Fire was another favorite tool of the defenders. When siege towers, those massive wooden structures on wheels, approached the walls, archers unleashed volleys of flaming arrows against them. Defenders also used long hooks on ropes to grab the towers and unbalance them. Nothing ruined the day like climbing an 18-meter siege tower, only to feel it suddenly tilting to the side like a drunk trying to climb stairs. Trebuchets presented a different challenge. These giant catapults could hurl stones from a distance, so defenders reinforced walls where impacts were expected and conducted night sorties to sabotage these machines. Some clever defenders even counted the seconds between launches to predict where to avoid standing. A particularly unpleasant siege tactic was biological warfare. Attackers sometimes catapulted diseased animal carcasses over the walls. The defenders' response: they catapulted some of the filth back, along with beehives and wasp nests. Talk about returning unwanted gifts with interest. Countermining was crucial when attackers dug tunnels under the walls. Defenders dug their own tunnels to intercept them, flooding enemy tunnels with smoke or releasing attack dogs. Many castles kept specialized anti-siege equipment ready, including wooden structures called hoardings, that could be quickly mounted to extend the range from which defenders could pour things. While the previous section showed how castles used architecture to create deadly traps, these active defenses proved that medieval defenders did not rely only on thick walls. They fought back with ingenuity that would make modern military strategists proud. And when all else failed, they always had one more powerful weapon in their arsenal. Success in medieval warfare frequently came down to who could last the longest. Castles transformed time itself into a weapon against attackers. Psychological warfare was a fundamental strategy. Defenders feasted on the battlements, ensuring the smell of roasting meat reached the starving besiegers. Medieval taunting did not need words, just a chicken leg waved provocatively from a tower window. Sieges ruined attackers financially. A typical army in the 14th century cost approximately 500 gold coins daily. After weeks without progress, many lords simply ran out of money. The siege of Kenilworth Castle lasted 6 months before the attackers gave up. The climate favored the defenders. Winter sieges were brutal for armies camped outside. More soldiers died from cold, disease, and hunger than in combat. The castle residents were not staying at a 5-star resort, but compared to the attackers sleeping in the mud, they might as well have been. Castle defenders mastered surprise attacks called sorties. Small groups burst from hidden gates to attack siege equipment or supply lines before retreating quickly. Deception also helped. Helmets on sticks made it look like more soldiers guarded the walls. Trumpets and drums created the impression of reinforcements arriving. The most effective defense was often patience. Approximately 60% of castle sieges ended with the attackers simply giving up. While the previous section showed how castles actively fought siege machines, this combination of patience and psychological warfare completed their defensive strategy, transforming stone structures into active participants in medieval power struggles. The legacy of these extraordinary fortresses echoes through the centuries. The medieval castles that still stand today, from Edinburgh to Dover, from Bodiam to Crac-des-Chevaliers, are silent testaments to human ingenuity in the face of conflict. Each cracked wall, each ruined tower, each silted moat tells stories of sieges endured, battles fought, and lives lived under the constant shadow of war. Medieval builders did not have computers to calculate structural stresses. They did not possess heavy machinery to move stone blocks. They worked with ropes, pulleys, brute force, and an intuitive understanding of principles that modern engineers still admire. Their creations did not only resist armies, they resisted time, remaining standing centuries after the kingdoms they protected had disappeared into history books. When we observe these fortresses today, we see more than picturesque ruins. We see the culmination of generations of accumulated knowledge, passed from master to apprentice, refined through trial, error, and the hard lessons of failed sieges. Each innovation, from concentric walls to clockwise spiral staircases, represented a response to some ingenious attacker who had found a flaw in previous defenses. Castles also remind us that medieval warfare, despite being brutal, followed rules and rituals that seem almost civilized compared to the industrialized conflicts of later centuries. Sieges could last months or even years, with both sides negotiating, bluffing, and waiting. Honorable surrender was possible. Garrisons that resisted to the limit of their capabilities could march out with dignity intact. More deeply, these structures reveal something about human nature. The same impulse that led people to build Gothic cathedrals reaching for the heavens also led them to erect walls 6 meters thick. The capacity for beauty and brutality coexisted, often in the same building. The great halls where nobles danced and poets recited were just steps away from the murder holes where boiling water was poured over invaders. Medieval castles are ultimately architectural time capsules. Each stone carries echoes of voices long silenced, the commands of the builders, the orders of the lords, the cries of the soldiers, the prayers of the besieged. For those willing to look beyond the romantic surface, they offer an incomparable window into an era of iron, stone, and relentless human determination. If this journey through the secrets of medieval castles has sparked your curiosity about military history, defensive architecture, or simply the extraordinary stories of men and women who lived and died behind these walls, there is much more to explore. Just as medieval builders stacked stone upon stone to create their fortresses, each video on this channel adds a new layer to our understanding of the past. Subscribe to follow the next expeditions through history. Leave your comment telling us which aspect of medieval castles fascinated you most. And if this documentary has strengthened your knowledge as a good wall protects a garrison, share it with other curious minds who appreciate the stories that ancient stones still have to tell. Together, we will continue exploring the mysteries that time has left behind.